podcast with your host, Matthew and Ritah Murphy.
Welcome to episode 4 of the Fifth Gospel podcast. As we get deeper and deeper into the Fifth Gospel, today we're going to be discussing interpretive authority. But let me start by recapping what was mentioned in our introductory episode. These first few podcasts, as well as the first few chapters of the Fifth Gospel book, are primarily concerned with setting the stage so that the answers presented later might make more sense. In the second episode, we referred to the concept of divine agency, which is the way the scriptures interpret the presence and work of a transcendent God. Now, in this episode, we go deeper into those themes as we continue laying the groundwork of the Fifth Gospel by addressing a fundamental question: interpretive authority. That is, who gets to say what the Bible and Christian tradition actually means? And why should we trust them in what they claim? Why trust me? Why trust any person? Because the moment we move from divine revelation to human understanding, interpretation inevitably enters the picture. Now, there are specific fields such as hermeneutics, which we'll explore a little more in the book, that are dedicated to examining how humans interpret reality over time. But here, we're just going to lead with the premise that human beings possess interpretive power. We carry that interpretive power with us when engaging scripture and prophetic text. This power shapes how truth is perceived, framed, and communicated.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So if everyone is interpreting the Bible through their own perspective, who actually has the authority to say what it means, and where is the line between an authority worth trusting or accepting and one worth questioning? Because I can give you my example. I was just listening to all these people and trying to understand the Bible through their lens, and I got fed up. I'm like, I know God speaks to me, so I need to read the Bible for myself so I can understand for myself. Mm-hmm. So who has this authority?
Well, I got to tell you, Ritah, those are the exact kind of questions that sit at the center of most theological institutions and councils, and it's what we're going to explore. The Fifth Gospel begins with this premise: God is perfect. We'll get into why we believe that has to be in later episodes. But the human interpretive process isn't. It's shaped by cognitive limits, biases, and the pull of conditions of culture and history. You know, we don't actually have audio recordings of Jesus. What we have are human witnesses, memories, traditions, and eventually texts, preserving and interpreting what was experienced by the early followers and what they heard and believed. Now, some of these sources deserve more weight than others. The biblical authors and earliest witnesses have an obvious advantage. They stood closer to Jesus and the events themselves. But proximity doesn't eliminate the human element. Whether it's me, you, the biblical authors, or later scribes and teachers, we're all still receiving, understanding, and communicating divine claims through human minds. And that doesn't make these sources untrustworthy. It just means every witness is already interpreting, not just reporting or recording the facts as they occur. So where's the line? Well, for us, it's this. The Spirit of Jesus, what we talked about in episode 3, which is the unction and the energy that reveals, empowers, and drives us to want the same wholeness for others that we seek for ourselves. That's agape. That's the Spirit of Jesus. And every scripture, every teaching gets studied through that lens. It's the common thread running through Christ's message as his followers understood it. And that's indicated in Matthew 22, 1 Corinthians 13, the Johannine text, and on through the rest of the New Testament. If we're sure of anything Jesus taught, it's this: love others the way he did. That's our standard, and that's our authority.
So you say this doesn't make the sources less trustworthy, but you're highlighting the lack of faith you have in human process. If I'm understanding this correctly, you're claiming that divine inspiration is perfect, but the way in which we as humans interpret God's message can never be. And if that is the case, how do we know God is perfect? How do we know what to believe? Are you saying we need to eliminate faith in this whole situation?
Eliminate faith. No. So I like that you're bringing faith up, because we're not called to have complete faith in human interpretation. No person is 100% accurate reflection of God except Christ. And I believe that Christ's perfection helps explain why so many of his earliest followers were willing to endure persecution and even martyrdom for what they believed they had encountered in him. It also helps explain how this movement survived and expanded despite the hostility of one of the world's most powerful empires, beginning from a small grassroots movement into a faith that would eventually transform the empire itself and become one of the most influential movements in human history. Hopefully, as we continue through this podcast series, you'll begin to discover why I say these things about Jesus' witness. Now, 1 John 4 says explicitly that God is agape. In Romans 13, Mark 12, Luke 10, some of the other chapters that I mentioned earlier, and elsewhere, we find the clearest thread of consistency in the biblical text. It's agape that's perfect. It's agape that is divinely inspired. It's agape alone that we're called to have faith in for eternal wholeness. All other teachings should converge in agape, the self-giving love that inspires us to live with compassion for all others, even enemies. We're especially called to reach out to the most vulnerable and desperate, not out of self-righteous duty or desire for recognition, but out of genuine empathy for them, because their suffering and their lack in need matter to us.
Well, as you obviously know, I don't care for that term self-giving love. I prefer agape or universal love. I know you use them synonymously, but just to clarify, are you saying that because the Bible is a human interpretation with some inconsistencies, the only lessons that we can trust from it is love?
What inconsistent? Well, there are plenty of other beneficial teachings in the Bible, fasting, tithing, prayer, that matter. But they only come to life and only have value insofar as they lead to agape. You know, people bring up all these inconsistencies in the New Testament. The resurrection accounts don't quite line up. The sequence and chronology of events differ between the Gospels. The two genealogies in Matthew and Luke don't match. And you've got these awkward moments between the accounts, and it makes some people say, you see, this is just made up. This is myth making. But actually, I think that argument gets it backwards. It inverts it. The gospel texts unfold as real testimony, authentic human interpretation. Put several people in the same room, Let them witness the same event and then ask them about it later. You'll get overlap, but you'll also get differences. One person remembers a detail another leaves out. Someone emphasizes something others barely mention. Now imagine those witnesses go on to tell that story within a community, and that community begins comparing notes over time before eventually agreeing to write it all down in a letter. This resembles the process many believe occurred in the New Testament. Well, at least with the making of the New Testament. And they may even borrow details, that is, the different books from one another. Yet, they still end up telling parts of the story in ways that are difficult to reconcile. All of this is consistent with what we know generally about human witness and testimony. Think about how a story works when someone controls or directs the whole thing, when one person does. Take an ancient myth like something the Roman poet Virgil would have written, deliberately shaped to make a point, or some propaganda. Or better, bring it into the present when you use AI to write something for you. The author can remove contradictions and refine a lot of the loose ends. Any detail that gets in the way of the message can simply be edited out. The biblical gospels don't work that way. They're the testimony of multiple witnesses preserved by an early community that judged them authentic and sacred, not the product of one person shaping a final draft. That rawness actually strengthens its message, and that's part of what makes the New Testament interesting. Nobody successfully went back and removed the irregularities. It's not one perfect coordinated account. The rough edges survived. It's incredible, really. It seems to have maintained much of its authenticity. And that doesn't prove that every detail is historically accurate, but it does look like what we would expect when multiple streams of human memory and testimony are preserved rather than a single author engineering one story. And I said all this because it ties into what scholars may call the criterion of embarrassment. Basically, if a detail would have been awkward or damaging for the early church to include, and they included it anyway, that's a signal that it's probably a true and honest work. Peter denying Jesus 3 times, the disciples running away scared at the crucifixion, women being the first witnesses at the tomb. And this is happening at a time and in a culture when women weren't even considered credible witnesses. Jesus himself is recorded saying he doesn't know the day or the hour when he's coming back. You don't put that stuff in if you're trying to sell people on a polished story. A community making up its own origin story clearly would edit that out. They don't leave contradictions or doubt scattered across 4 different accounts. So those rough edges, those disagreements, those uncomfortable details stayed in to this day. That's actually what you would expect from real credible testimony. And it's exactly what you would not expect from something manufactured, like ancient myth or otherwise. And again, what we know about authentic human memory, and we'll come back to this in a later podcast, is that multiple witnesses can sometimes disagree when recalling surrounding details while still being extremely consistent about the gist of it. What exactly happened, what mattered, and what the core message was. And that's important here. Jesus' resurrection and his emphasis on agape remain extremely consistent across the Gospels and the broader New Testament, even when some of the surrounding details differ.
Okay, so according to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, if we don't have love, nothing else matters. What's your take on that?
I think the Apostle Paul understood the assignment. If we belong to God, then we obviously will reflect his character.
Well, Thank you, everyone, for listening in and joining us on this journey. We'll talk to you soon.
Like, share, and subscribe, and we'll connect again next time.